Hey, if you've been painting with watercolor, I'm sure you can relate to this. You're doing your best to create a painting you love and enjoy, but the colors feel off. You can't quite put your finger on it, but you can definitely tell something's not working. And you're truly trying your best. You have your palette set up and your colors just the way you like them. You know where everything is and the different colors you can get by mixing the colors in your palette. But all of that is lost in the sauce. The sauce that is the messy watercolor painting process. Well, in this video, I'll attempt to solve this issue for you, or more accurately, I'll do my best to inspire you to find the perfect solution for you. Before we get started, this video is sponsored by my newest book, Painting a Masterpiece. If you love watercolor and you want to own a bunch of my paintings in the form of an art book, be sure to check it out in the first link in the description box. And if you know someone else who'd enjoy it, consider getting it for them as a gift. Thank you so much. Now let's dive in. Let me start by stating this. Art has no rules. Let me repeat that. Art truly has no clear rules of thumb, or guidelines. Now, before you feel the urge to resist this idea, hear me out because the proof is out there. There are countless artists across human history, all with completely different approaches, materials, processes, all using completely different color combinations and feelings. And it all looks amazing. You personally may not love all of it, but I could probably provide you easily with 100 examples you will love, with great differences in all the parameters I just mentioned. So why is it then? Why do all their paintings work? It's easy to start looking for commonalities, aka rules and guidelines. We as humans, we love making sense of things, and this is why every teacher out there, virtually every teacher, offers methods, rules, and how-tos. Now, I would argue that this is pointless. Why is that? Because the sterile rule made of examining hundreds or even thousands of paintings, looking for patterns and averaging it all out, this rule will never hold the original genius that created the beautiful painting in the first place. Instead, I find that tapping into this genius directly is far more effective. Now, I can hear you through the screen. Okay, Liron, but how do I actually do that? The way I see it, there are two prerequisites for achieving spectacular color harmony. And in the next two chapters of this video, we'll explore them both. So let's start with the first one, which is understanding. The first thing I'd like us to do is to actually look at colors, because the better you understand something, the more you can make use of it in your art. This is true for the science of light and shadow, for the anatomy of the human body, and many other topics included within the art world. Merely understanding the facts will lead to better results with no added effort needing to be exerted by you. And in order to understand something, it has to be examined, researched, and looked at. So let's do just that for colors. And we'll start with the color wheel. So here's one simple example of such a color wheel. If we go around the wheel, we'll be looking at different hues. What are hues? These are actually colors in the most widely spread meaning of the word. A hue is a color. There are blue hues, red hues, orange, purple, and more. Every color a kindergartner is familiar with is actually a hue. Hues can be mixed to make new hues. The three primary colors, or the three primary hues, are red, blue, and yellow. And by mixing those, we can create orange, purple, and green. But have you ever stopped to consider how the color wheel is organized? The way it's arranged is actually quite fascinating. The color wheel is simply a closed-off rainbow. That's right. If you take a rainbow and you make it into a circle, closing it off, you'll get the color wheel. And here's what's really cool about it. This nature-inspired color wheel has the primary colors, dividing it into thirds. Then, squished in between them are the secondary colors that the primary colors mix. So between the red and yellow, you'll find orange. Between yellow and blue, you'll find green. And between blue and red, you'll find purple. And in between all of these lie the tertiary colors. So real quick, these are red-orange, yellow-orange, yellow-green, blue-green, blue-purple, and red-purple. And if you open up the color wheel, you'll get a rainbow. It's interesting to ask, why even organize the colors that way in our wheel? While it is true that nature itself created a rainbow in that order, how come it makes sense to simply close it into a wheel? Who decided on that? This is where you'll find another fascinating answer. The wheel is organized in such a way, very naturally, that perfectly opposing colors end up neutralizing each other. In other words, mixing the colors that are opposed on the color wheel would create a gray, or a very dark gray, or even black in some instances. This is why they're called complementary colors. They complete each other. Now, why does that happen? The explanation is quite simple. Another way of achieving black is by mixing all primary colors together. This will either produce a perfect black or a dark gray, depending on your paint's consistency. You can try this out with your watercolor set. Mix your blue, red, and yellow and see what you get. Do note, however, that to get a perfect black, you'll need to use perfect primary colors. Every brand has its own pigments and tube names, so a bit of research may be required. But generally speaking, you're looking for colors that are close to a printer's cyan, yellow, and magenta combination. For Daniel Smith, what I discovered works quite well are the colors labeled as Hansa Yellow Light, quinacridone rose, and phthalo blue green shade specifically. If you mix these all together, you'll get some kind of a relatively neutral black. It is worth mentioning here that mixing paint is different from mixing light, because that's something you may wonder. Mixing all colors of light will actually create a white. Mixing all paints, physical paint, will create a black. Now, the explanation is a little too scientific for this lesson, but I'm sure there are wonderful videos out there explaining this phenomenon. But going back to our original question, why do complementary colors cancel each other out, thus mixing a gray? Simple, if you've been following. If you look at, for example, the complementary colors red and green, you'll notice one is primary, red, and the other is secondary, green. Now, how is green mixed? Using yellow and blue. So if we break down our mix, red plus green actually equals red plus yellow plus blue. In other words, this is as if you are mixing all primary colors together. And that's the whole story. You can run this exact scenario for every combo on the color wheel and it'll work. Blue plus orange, right? Because these are complementaries. It's actually blue plus red plus yellow. And guess what? This also works for tertiary color combinations. If we look at yellow-green plus red-violet, for example, they can be broken down into yellow plus blue on one end and red plus blue on the other end. So if we zoom out a bit, yes, this does amount to simply mixing two of every primary color. So mixing all primary colors creates something close to a black or a dark gray. And the same is true for complementary colors on the color wheel. Let's look at another interesting bit here. A common adage is that complementary colors look good together or enhance each other. Why is that the case? Why are they said to enhance each other? And is there actually an explanation for that? Well, there may be a scientific explanation, actually. In our eyes' retinas are cones. These are essentially color receptors. These are what receive the colors, interpret them, and pass them on to the brain. There are generally 3 types of cones, with each responding a little differently to different colors. So every color stimulates every type of cone in a different way. This is how we can distinguish between millions of different colors and variations. Perhaps the reason complementary colors lead to a satisfying feeling when used in proximity lies in the mechanism of the retina. In my research, I found this really useful comment on Reddit, and I'm just going to read it out to you. The complementary colors are opposites, red-green, blue-yellow-orange, as you noted. This is fundamental to why we prefer them together and can be illustrated by after effect or after image. Essentially, when seeing a particular color, the receptors in your eyes that detect that color fatigue and strain. As they do, they detect less and less of that color. If you stare at a red dot for 30 seconds and then look to a white area, you'll see a green dot after effect. This green dot is the result of the red receptors in your eyes being fatigued and not detecting the red light in the white area, leaving reds opposite to over-detect or appear to. When we pair these two colors with each other, we in effect make it easier on our eyes to delineate the contrasting areas. We strain the opposite receptors at the same time. It leads to brighter contrasts and less blurring in your vision. Now, I'm not a scientist, I'm merely quoting what this person says. Feel free to correct me in the comments below, but it does seem that perhaps using two complementary colors leads to a more satisfying feeling and a more relaxing of the eyes. One way or another, though, this effect has been discovered by artists a long time ago and does now play a role in art theory. And so far we've looked at the color wheel and discussed primary, secondary, and tertiary colors. We know that the color wheel is a closed rainbow and that the opposing colors on the wheel are called complementary colors. We know that mixing all our primary colors leads to a black or a dark gray, and we know a similar phenomenon happens with complementary colors due to how they are arranged and mixed to begin with. Before we move on, it's important to examine two other qualities of colors: chroma, also known as saturation, and value. Terminology can sometimes be needlessly scary and confusing, so I'd like to preface this by saying, worry not, these are very simple ideas to understand, and I will do my best to stick to the basic facts. Not my opinion, not what I think you should do, but just the facts. Chroma is how gray a color is. So if we select a color off the color wheel, we can basically move it from gray to perfectly saturated. We can treat chroma basically as saturation. It's the more commonly used word. A higher chroma means a stronger and more saturated color, and a lower chroma means it is gray. Now, the lowest chroma will be perfectly gray, not a mix of the color and a gray, it'll just be a gray. So let's say we have this yellow. Based on what we learned about the color wheel, how would you lower its chroma using watercolor? I'll give you a moment to think. That is correct. You add more and more of the color's complementary color, the color opposing it on the color wheel, which will neutralize it. In this example, it's a purple. By gradually adding more and more purple to the yellow, we'll end up neutralizing it, ideally into a perfect gray. Now, the more purple we add after this point, we'll push it more towards looking actually purple. Now on to values. Value is how dark or light a color is. In watercolor, the value of a color can be changed by simply adding black to make it darker or water to make it lighter. In opaque media, more often white would be added instead of water, but because watercolor is a water-based media, we can make the color lighter by simply adding water. There are other ways of controlling a color's value by adding different colors and combinations to it instead of just black and white or water, but let's keep it simple for now. So you now know what chroma and value are. In the context of painting, these are used to represent the large variety of colors that are out there, whether it's a scene you're painting or just a small subject matter, a still life. There's tons of colors there, and we use color, chroma, and value to represent all of them. Before we move on, I do want to mention something interesting. Some colors are inherently darker than others. That's right. If you had to guess, what would be the naturally lightest color out there? If you thought to yourself yellow, then yes, you are correct. If we take this entire color wheel and turn it grayscale, this is what we'll get. Notice how dark the reds and blues are versus the yellow. By that logic, you'll find that a perfect violet is darker than a perfect orange or green because it's mixed using only the two darker primary colors. It doesn't have yellow in it. The same will be true for the tertiary colors. So a blue violet is going to be darker than a yellow orange, for example. It's going to be a small difference, but it does exist, and it's best to be aware of, especially because as you paint, you may struggle with producing a darker value using yellows. So to conclude, we are now more familiar with the color wheel, and we also learned what chroma and value are. We also have some idea of how to mix different colors using watercolor and how to change their values in chroma. With that said, let's take a moment to briefly look at some common color harmonies and how artists utilize them. Here's another color wheel. The most commonly discussed element is indeed complementary colors. And you can see that by choosing that from the drop-down menu, we see all the possible combinations by moving it around. Then we can look at analogous colors. This basically creates a scheme of colors from the same family as they're close together on the rainbow or on our color wheel. One other interesting combo is the split complementary choice. This essentially splits one of the complementary colors into the colors besides it, to its sides. So we're staying within the same family, but getting some variety. One color, and then instead of its complementary color, two other colors that are close to it. Lastly, another interesting choice is the triadic option. This is something we'll soon see exemplified in a painting, but for now, this can consist of all primary colors, all secondary colors, and some other interesting combinations, depending on how we select the colors and move the wheel around. I'm personally a big fan of showing all primary colors in every painting I make, but not in their most saturated form. Rather, I enjoy reducing the chroma, aka saturation, on one or two of the three colors, and then having one more dominant. So let's look at how some of these concepts come into play in the work of artists I enjoy. Starting with one of my favorite painters ever, John Singer Sargent. If you observe a lot of his landscapes, you'll notice he doesn't shy away from using relatively strong and isolated colors. In Artist in Discipline, he clearly utilizes the three secondary colors, meaning he's using a triadic harmony, as we've just seen, including purple, green, and orange. And if we bring chroma into the discussion, you can see how most of the purples are lower chroma, meaning more neutral and gray, while probably the most chromatic colors, the most strongest, more saturated ones in the scene are the warms and the oranges. This is, of course, not the complete picture, though. If we start swatching this painting, we'll definitely find yellows, blues, and other variations. But sometimes when looking at colors, it is useful to take a step back and look at the overall feel. Despite that, however, let's zoom in for a second on some nuances. The Purple Mountains, for example. You'll notice how Sargent makes use of complementary colors by placing warm yellows and browns right next to the purples. He seemed to have both mixed the two together, as seen within the large purple area containing browns as well, and you can see a bit of granulation, but he also seemed to place them next to one another, as seen near the edges of the purple shapes. You can find some stronger yellows there. This gives us a clue as to why the end result is attractive to the eye. But not all paintings are as obvious. Let's look at Portrait of Lady Agnew of Lucknow. Hopefully I'm pronouncing it correctly. One of Sargent's most famous paintings and another big personal favorite of mine. The color harmony here might not be as obvious. There's a big difference in the use of colors here, cluing us in on the fact that you can have range. No one says you have to paint only one way or another. Let's swatch some of the colors here. Obviously, the general feel is much more nuanced. The colors seem to be a little closer together, like they belong in the same family. If we were to look for a complementary pattern, searching around a focal point will expose a wonderful contrast of warm yellows and cooler purples. But art is more complex than that. As I mentioned earlier, trying to force a rule or a guideline or a best practice, in this example by searching for complementary colors everywhere, tends to miss the point. Sargent's brilliance goes beyond that. And you know what? He might have been merely matching the colors as he saw them. Now let's look at a painting with quite a different feeling and colors from Picasso's Blue Period called The Soup. There is a clear dominant color family here, in the blues and the greens, mostly blues though. It sends an immediate message and feeling. These can be interpreted in multiple ways: sadness, coldness, or even darkness in nighttime. To me, the coldness one stands out more than the others, especially considering the name and subject matter of the painting, soup. And alongside the blues and greens, there are also some yellows, but even those are neutral and often slightly on the greenish side. I feel like this makes the painting even more overwhelming. Everything is seen from that cold blue framework. Now, one element you might have picked up on in some of these paintings we observed so far is how the colors often have a unified feeling to them. There may be a reason to that. If you watched my video on reflected light, which will be linked somewhere in the card above, you probably know that light bounces off objects. This means all objects in a scene influence the other objects by reflecting light and thus their own color onto the other objects. And it's important to note most scenes are lit homogeneously. This means there's a main light source that bathes the entire scene. It could be regular old daylight, as seen in this lovely painting by Mary Cassette titled Maternal Caress, or it could be a more subdued light coming from the outside into a house, as seen in her other work titled Little Girl in a Blue Armchair. It could also be a completely artificial light source, as seen in Edward Hopper's Nighthawks. And sometimes it can be a mix of both or all. But what do all of these scenes have in common? It's a consistent light, a consistent feeling of light and shadow. Now, I'm not saying this is a rule, but just a fact, a reality. If you're interested in representing the colors you see accurately, you will end up using colors that hint at a consistent light throughout the scene, because that's just how life is. There is a light source and it affects everything the same way. Once again, this isn't a rule, and you can paint however you want, but know that a big part of what's responsible for a realistic feeling in your paintings is how consistent the light feels. This is why some paintings benefit from just a coat of the same color over the entire thing, just a thin yellow, a thin blue. It gives it that feeling of consistency. And this is also achieved, by the way, by incorporating chroma and value, meaning how saturated a color is and how light or dark it is. It all comes together to form a realistic, believable, representational impression. Phew, okay, we've covered quite a bit. We looked at some rules of nature, which I'm calling these rules, it's just facts, it's just reality. Hopefully I haven't put in too much of my opinion into them. None of these tell you how to do things. Let me go back to my point from earlier. Painting is an art form. It's not a science. Some science can help inform our decisions or generate some ideas we wouldn't have otherwise thought of. But at the end of the day, no one is here to tell you how to do things. You'll soon be looking at a blank piece of paper or canvas, and you can paint whatever you want, however you want. So equipped with all of this knowledge, you might be left with the question, what's next? This brings me to my second main point of this video. Colors are largely a matter of personal taste. Ask 10 different people and you'll get 10 different answers for their favorite colors, their favorite combinations. The thing with taste is that it naturally develops over time with no effort on your part. The only thing required of you is to do what you love, to find what you enjoy painting, and explore the deepest facets of it. When I observe my own art, I can definitely see this process of exploration. In one of my recent paintings, Tarp 2, I aim to explore the colorfulness of this sunlit scene. This comes into play in the variety of colors you can find, and also some nuanced layering, such as the reds apparent in some of the tarp's shadows, right under the blue layers and above the yellow layers. There are some clever plays of colors here. In a different painting titled OCD, I aim to capture the beautiful blue lights of the restaurant as they contrasted with the warm skin tones of the chefs and cooks. What especially fascinated me was flipping my usual script and using blue highlights in warm shadows, which is the opposite of how I usually paint light and shadow. And in another example, Stormy Night, the main thing I cared about was the lovely car's taillights and the reflections in the storm, and perhaps a bit of the highway lights, which is why this scene is dominated only by lots of reds and maybe a few yellows. Every painting is different, just like my mood while painting it was different. More than anything, I would say that my mood and intuitive desire is what tends to dictate the colors I'm going to use, as well as the chroma and value. You see, you don't have to limit yourself to one preference or another. Perhaps every painting you make looks vastly different to the others. And my own preferences in my own art may also be vastly different from what I love and enjoy about others' art. And the thing is, in order for other people to buy into your painting, first you have to buy into it. You have to see it before others do. You have to be fascinated by it and enjoy exploring it. And that is something that cannot be faked. Instead, it's a matter of honestly finding out your own taste. That's right, it all comes back to your personal taste. Do you like a variety of explosive colors? Perfect. Or do you prefer nuanced hints of color variations? Also wonderful. Do you enjoy disregarding colors completely and playing only with shapes, values, and edges, working monochromatically? Great. For each of these, you'll find many artists at the peak of their game on the cutting edge of vision and technique. There are no how-tos, rules, or guidelines. Only your own pure creation and discovery. The only thing you can do is develop your knowledge of the topic at hand. In our case today, colors. And then go out there and explore. What colors do you enjoy? What moods and feelings do you enjoy? What subject matter is your favorite? What idea do you wish to communicate to the person viewing your painting? And by the way, I don't know yet is an honest and fine answer. I didn't either, and sometimes I still don't know. It's an invitation to explore and experiment. So go get your colors and see what you can discover. And if you enjoyed this video, do check out my newest book on Amazon, Painting a Masterpiece, How I Painted 100 Cars to Achieve Watercolor Perfection. This book is the culmination of the last couple of years of painting, and it includes some of my big insights about what separates a masterful painting from the rest. And it's a wonderful way of owning over 100 of my paintings in one consolidated place. If you're an enjoyer of watercolor art, or if you know someone who'd love this one, be sure to check it out in the first link in the description box below. Get your copy of Painting a Masterpiece today, support my work, and have a beautiful physical art book featuring some of my best watercolors ever. I hope you'll give it a look, and I also want to thank everyone who supports me over on Patreon. Your support means the world to me, and it's a part of how we pay the bills around here. If you want to receive credit at the end of my videos, as well as access to some exclusive posts and lessons, be sure to give it a look. I have another exclusive new process coming out over there really soon, so consider joining and supporting me this way. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one. Take care.